thought today we would start our video in my home gym because we're talking about protein. And one of the big roles that protein has, about 40% of the protein in your body is in your muscles. And muscle protein allows you to move, and it's really structural. So you have protein in your muscles that's providing structure, you have protein in your bones that's providing structure, and you can even use protein in either of those sources as extra energy if you need it. So protein rocks, and you probably knew it was in your muscles. You probably knew you need to eat protein if you want to build larger muscles. Larger muscles. But you may not know the other roles of protein, and that's where we're going to start today. What else does protein do besides be a part of your muscles and your bones? Other proteins are enzymes, and we talked about enzymes when we talked about digestion of macronutrients. We had amylases for carbohydrate, we had lipases for fat, we had peptases for protein. And enzymes, they catalyze reactions. So they make a reaction that would have happened maybe slowly, happen really fast. Did not expect to get a workout from filming this video, but here we are. So enzymes are really important because they make reactions happen throughout the body. So they can synthesize new compounds or they can break compounds apart. Enzymes, proteins. The building blocks of protein are amino acids, and amino acids are integral in forming certain hormones like insulin and glucagon that we talked about before. Remember, hormones are signaling molecules. So for insulin, for example, it's signaling cells to take up glucose from the blood and store it to lower your blood glucose levels. So we wouldn't have insulin and glucagon without amino acids and without eating protein. We also find amino acids in certain neurotransmitters, which are also signaling our bodies. All right, I think that's my signal to stop jump roping. Jump roping is hard, man. Proteins are also essential in forming antibodies, and antibodies are so cool because they are proteins in our body that recognize invaders. So like viral, bacterial invaders to our body, they will recognize and then they will attack them to get rid of them. So like we're in the coronavirus pandemic, we want to have antibodies to COVID-19 so that we can fight it. So if you've had COVID-19, you've probably developed antibodies, and what's really cool about that is that you are very unlikely, we think, to get COVID-19 again. We know that this is true for many diseases. If you have antibodies for them, your body will remember the next time that you see that illness, and it will attack because it has these antibodies that just so quickly recognize that, oh, there's bacteria in here, there's a virus in here, and they get rid of it. So antibodies are very specific to one virus, which is why with coronavirus, we may have had many other different types of coronaviruses because they're the common cold. But if we haven't had COVID-19, we don't have antibodies to it yet. But antibodies are essential in our immune system functioning. They heal us, just like this foam roller is healing the soreness in my quads. So antibodies are proteins. If you don't have enough protein, you will not have a strong immune system. So we gotta eat protein, pump that up. We also find proteins as transport proteins. So we talked about lipoproteins with fat, and they're transporting fat and cholesterol around your body. And they're called lipoproteins because they involve protein. So transport proteins are also super important kinds of protein. Proteins are also integral in fluid electrolyte balance. And this just means the balance of fluid inside and outside of cells. Proteins attract water. So if you have more proteins inside a cell than outside of cell, the water is going to be attracted to the proteins that are inside the cell, and so the cellular fluid will fill up. If you had more proteins outside the cell, you'd be able to keep more water outside the cell. So by regulating what proteins are in the cell, what proteins are out of the cell, your body maintains fluid electrolyte balance. Water can move freely across the cell membrane, but proteins can't. So they're either in or they're out. And that's how then the water gradient will shift depending on what proteins and how much are in and out. Electrolytes also play a big role here. So you may have heard of sodium and potassium as electrolytes, and they will also drive fluid across the cell membrane. And we will talk more about those in our minerals section. But for now, just realize that proteins are so important in balance of fluid and electrolytes across your cell membrane. Proteins also act as acid-base buffers in our blood. So just by normally going about our daily lives, we generate different acid and base compounds that have to be carried in the blood. But the blood needs to maintain a specific pH. So if it's carrying a lot of like lactic acid after a workout, it can't be too acidic. So blood proteins are really cool because if the blood is too acidic, a blood protein might take up extra hydrogen to neutralize the blood. And if the blood is too basic, a blood protein might donate hydrogen to the blood to make it more acidic. So blood proteins can react to the pH of the blood to keep it neutral. Pretty cool protein. It's really important to keep blood pH within a specific band because you can get alkalosis or acidosis, which are life-threatening conditions. So that's why our body is set up to keep blood pH really in a specific range. The last type of protein is our clotting proteins. So they're also in the blood and they help us clot our blood when we get a cut. So if you didn't have any clotting proteins, when you got a cut, you would just keep bleeding. So you could like bleed out from a paper cut. That would not be good. So we have clotting proteins that will help our blood to clot and keep us from losing too much blood. Yay, proteins! Look at all those cool roles they have. Okay, so now that we know some of the functions of protein and how cool and unique they are, I want to talk about the structure of protein because it is also really unique when we compare it to carbs and fat. So carbs and fat are made up of mostly carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but protein is unique because it contains nitrogen. Every protein will have nitrogen, and then protein is also unique because there are 20 different amino acids that chain together to make different proteins. With carbs, we really didn't have that many variations on structure, right? We had 3 monosaccharides, 3 disaccharides, and then we had the ability to string them in longer chains to make polysaccharides. With fat, we had a little bit more variability in terms of the length of the fatty acid chain, their saturation or unsaturated saturation level, but still it was like kind of the same riff. But with protein, all the amino acids are pretty unique, and some of them are essential, some of them we can make in our body, and so they're all very special. And so let's take a look at amino acids, how they're connected and how they coil together with different forces and make these really wonderfully unique 3D protein structures.
Let's talk about the structures of proteins. And they really have the unique structure, as I mentioned, because they all have nitrogen, which we do not see in carbohydrates or fat. And there's a lot of variety. So there's 20 different amino acids. I'll show you a picture in just a minute of all of them, and we'll be able to see that they're all really unique. They do share some common elements. So as you can see on the graphic on the right, all amino acids have a carbon atom, which is the black circle in the middle. And then they have an amine group, which is the blue, and that contains the nitrogen. And then they have an acid group, which is the yellow oval. And they all also have a unique side chain, which is the green. And the side chains are really variable and where you can see a lot of difference between the amino acids. The side chains can also have different charges, different polarities. They might be hydrophobic or hydrophilic. So the side chains are going to dictate a lot of the structure and function of the amino acid. Here are the 20 amino acids, boop-a-da-boo. And if they're in a solid circle, it means that they are non-essential, and the dashed circles mean that they are essential. Just like fats, essential amino acids, we need to consume them in food. We cannot make them. Non-essential amino acids we can make, and often we make them from essential amino acids. A unique relationship that works like this is that we can make tyrosine from phenylalanine. So phenylalanine is essential, tyrosine we can make, all of these amino acids you can also see have these different structures and side chains. The differences in their structure are all coming from the side chains, and it's just important to point that out so that you can see that unlike carbs and fat, they all kind of look a little bit different. How do amino acids become proteins? Well, we're going to link the various different amino acids together to create different proteins, and the type of bond that we use to do that is a peptide bond. So peptide bonds are going to link the amine group, so the nitrogen containing group of one amino acid, to the acid group of the next. And when you get 10 or more amino acids in a chain, you have a polypeptide, and then you combine these polypeptide chains to make proteins. So proteins actually have 4 kind of levels of structure. So their primary structure is the amino acids that are in their chain. Then they start to coil and helix, and they do this because of the different qualities of the amino acids. So some amino acids, like water, those are going to end up on the outside of the helix. Some amino acids are hydrophobic, they don't like water, so they're going to end up on the inside of the helix. And then some amino acids have a positive charge side chain, some have a negative charge side chain, and so they're going to attract and repel each other to form these helical structures. And then the polypeptide chains then start to fold over each other, and that creates their tertiary structure. And then finally, you can aggregate 2 or more polypeptides together to form these big quaternary protein structures. This is a lot different than carbohydrate or fat, and it makes protein so unique, and it also explains the wide variety of roles that protein has in our body. And we can just make so many different proteins, because if you think of all the ways you can combine 20 amino acids into unique proteins, I mean, it's basically infinite. So we can make many proteins. Proteins can function alone or in groups. That means that they can function as, sometimes a protein might just be a polypeptide chain folded up, but sometimes it might be a group like we just saw in the quaternary structure, and that might look here like hemoglobin. So you can see that hemoglobin is 4 highly folded protein chains, and then in the middle of each of the protein chains there's an iron. So that's a structure that makes up hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is essential for red blood cells. So we inherit protein sequences in our genes, but alterations from this can cause health issues. So if you have a mutation in a gene, you can have a health issue because you can't make a certain protein correctly. So an example is sickle cell disease. And as you can see in this chart, there have the amino acid sequence of hemoglobin at the bottom of the image, and there's a difference of 1 amino acid for those who don't have sickle cell disease versus those who don't. So there's a mutation. If you have sickle cell disease, you replace 1 amino acid with another, and then you get a completely differently shaped red blood cell. So instead of having that like nice round pitted red blood cell, you have kind of this C-shaped red blood cell that cannot hold iron very well, and leads to a variety of health problems. So what's the process of protein synthesis? Like, how do we make proteins? It's a pretty complex process because we get the codes for making proteins in our DNA. So in this visual of a cell, we're in the cell nucleus where the DNA is, and you can see there's the DNA strand, and you get a messenger RNA that kind of carries the DNA code out of the nucleus of the cell onto a ribosome. And ribosomes are like the protein manufacturer of the cell. So the mRNA has the code for whatever protein we're making, and then a tRNA will kind of escort amino acids over to the mRNA. So the tRNAs are kind of standing by. When the code on the mRNA indicates a certain amino acid, the tRNA will bring that amino acid over to the ribosome. So the tRNA is like the transporter for the amino acids to the ribosome. So you're adding amino acids. As soon as the tRNA drops off their amino acid, they leave, and the ribosome will incorporate the amino acids onto a growing protein peptide chain. Once you've finished translating the mRNA into the amino acid chain, you are left with this protein chain. So it really goes from DNA to RNA to mRNA to protein. Pretty cool, right? When a protein structure is destroyed, the protein is said to be denatured. And there are certain agents that will denature proteins, including cooking. So when you cook, you have the potential to denature a protein. If we look at a video of an egg cooking, when you first put it in, the white is usually pretty translucent, but then as it cooks, it gets whiter and whiter, firmer and firmer, and that's because you're denaturing the protein in the egg, but you're also making certain compounds more available. So like biotin is more available in cooked eggs than it is in raw eggs. So it's not bad to cook. Sometimes we can actually make nutrients more available when we denature proteins. But there are also more negative denaturing agents. So things like radiation, alcohol, acids, bases, salts of heavy metals, these will all also denature our proteins in more of a negative way. And salts of heavy metals could be things like mercury poisoning. If you get mercury poisoning, one piece of advice that poison centers will often give out is to drink milk, because then the mercury will denature the milk protein rather than the proteins in your body. Another form of denaturation is digestion, and so that's obviously really necessary. We need to denature the proteins in food so that we can digest the amino acids. Digestion of protein takes place in your mouth, your stomach, and your small intestine, just like it does for carbs and fat. In the mouth, not much is happening. We're just crushing and moistening the proteins, so you're beginning to perhaps disturb their structure, but not too much. In the stomach, we get a lot of protein digestion. It's really a key site for protein digestion. So the acid in the stomach, the hydrochloric acid, is going to denature the protein by uncoiling the protein strands. So it's taking those really nice 3D strands and structures and denaturing them. And then that's important because enzymes can then come in to this denatured strand that's now like strung out into an amino acid chain without coils, and they can better attack the peptide bonds, because what they're trying to do is separate the amino acid chain into individual amino acids. And then in your small intestine, the protein will enter as polypeptide, so that's just a chain of amino acids, and the alkaline juice from the pancreas will neutralize acid that was brought in from the stomach and also raise the pH of the small intestine. The raising of the pH is important because that activates the next set of enzymes that can then come in and further break up the polypeptide chain. So then you get pancreatic and intestinal enzymes that break the polypeptide chain into single amino acids, and then di and tripeptides, which are just chains of 2 amino acids and 3 amino acids. So these smaller proteins or peptide chains can then be absorbed through the small intestine. We're really trying to absorb these single amino acids. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to break these big protein structures into single amino acids. With amino acid absorption, it's all happening in the small intestine, just like carbs and fat. Amino acids are absorbed by the intestinal cells, and what's really interesting is each amino acid is going to have a separate absorption site in the small intestine. So if you do like a big supplementation of one kind of amino acid, you can kind of prevent your body from absorbing other amino acids that are like that. So if amino acids have a similar side chain, they might have similar absorption sites, and that's why you really don't want to take like single amino acid supplements, because you can kind of impact which amino acids your body can then absorb. Once amino acids have been absorbed in the small intestine, they're released to the blood, they travel to the liver, and then they're distributed to other cells where other cells might need to make proteins, or they can use these amino acids for energy, but we don't want to do that. That's a waste of amino acids. It's called amino acid wasting. And so we want to be we really just want cells to be using the proteins using the amino acid. We want cells to be using the amino acids to make proteins. Also a note that sometimes larger molecules, so bigger than the single amino acids or dipeptides, can escape to the blood intact. So they kind of make it through the small intestine without being fully digested, and these can cause allergic reactions. Once we absorb amino acids, what happens to them? Well, they're primarily used to do three things. The first thing is that they can be used by cells to build proteins. Cells will build whatever proteins they need using the amino acids that you have absorbed from food. And it's important to note that we need a constant stream of amino acids coming in through our diet because cells are constantly needing to rebuild their proteins. Think about the proteins in your muscles. You might be restructuring muscle cells frequently. You definitely are losing hair and nail cells frequently. So your body is constantly needing to replenish its amino acid stores so it can continue to build bodily proteins. You can also build other compounds using amino acids, especially the nitrogen in amino acids is necessary for certain vitamins like niacin. So you can build nitrogen-containing compounds with amino acids. And those are really the two functions that amino acids should be used for. You can also dismantle the amino acids, so you get rid of the nitrogen part, and then you can use the rest of the amino acid for fuel, so you can burn it for energy. Or if you already have enough energy from carbs and fat, you can convert the amino acid remnants to glucose or fat for storage. So you absolutely can store protein as fat. Just because you decide to eat only protein in your diet does not mean that you will not gain fat, because if you have excess calories coming in as protein, you will still store those calories as fat. But this third function is something called amino acid wasting, because anytime we don't use amino acids to build proteins or other compounds that require nitrogen, we are so-called wasting the amino acid. Amino acid wasting will occur in 4 conditions. The first is if you don't have enough energy, so if you're starving or you haven't had enough calories and you have to start using your body proteins for energy, breaking down your muscle cells, that's a wasting of amino acids. You're having to use them as energy. And this can be really dangerous if you don't eat enough and you start to break down like the protein in your heart muscle, because then your heart won't beat properly. So we don't want to be using proteins for energy. We really want to be eating carbohydrate and fat so that we spare our body the need to use protein for energy. We will also waste amino acids if the diet supplies more protein than the body needs, because there's only so much protein building the body's going to do, and once it's done all of that and you still have excess amino acids around, you're going to store them as glycogen or as fat, and that's a waste of the amino acids. So if you are eating too much protein, you are wasting those amino acids. If the body has too much of any single amino acid, that amino acid will be wasted. You can only take so much, so if you're taking like a huge supplement of amino acids, you might be wasting those. And if the diet supplies protein of low quality with too few essential amino acids, you're going to end up wasting amino acids. And this is because if you don't have the full complement of amino acids available to your body, it can't build all of its proteins. And so then it ends up just converting the other amino acids that it does have into fat or carbs, because if it can't build the proteins it needs to build because it doesn't have all the parts for that, it can't do anything but waste the remaining amino acids. So you want to be eating high quality proteins, and we'll talk about what that means in the next video. But mostly if you're eating like a varied diet, even like a vegan can absolutely get protein of high quality and have a full complement of amino acids. So it's not a huge concern unless you're just not eating enough.
Okay guys, I think we're ready to come out of the basement on proteins because we know their basic structure, we know they're made up of amino acids, and that they combine together to have all different shapes and then functions. So we need amino acids from food that we digest and absorb and then use to build body proteins, vitamins, hormones, antibodies to keep us healthy and to keep us strong. So we need protein for all sorts of things. Next time we're going to talk about protein in food. where you find it, whether you can be a vegetarian and get enough of it. So I'll see you guys then.